Oi oi, it's your boy Jack Slack, and you find me eating my first cream egg of the year. A Cadbury's cream egg. How we celebrate the passing of our Lord and Saviour. And it most certainly won't be my last. It's these heavyweight Apex main events, they're driving me to fatness. I don't know, but my goal as an older gentleman and martial arts hobbyist has always been to be able to go, been able to go a couple of rounds with the pros, whether that's grappling or striking, and maybe not being able to keep up the whole time, but having people say, yeah, that guy can go. Maybe not being able to make it through the length of a fight, but at least being able to go for a couple of rounds. And now I find that has also been the approach of ranked UFC heavyweights in the main event. Bloody hell. What a bad card, terrible main event. And we all knew it was going to be terrible coming in because it's Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and they put in a barely known schlub from the Contender Series who beat Martin Buday in his UFC debut, and apparently Martin Buday was ranked somehow. So that's how we got there. Better fights on this card. Some good flyweight tilts, but no, heavyweights are the main event. That's the rule. Everything else is just an opener for Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And to be fair to Rozenstruik, he mostly wasn't responsible for this fight being trash. He did get taken down easily by the gassest man alive a couple of times, but he did at least jab him up and then, never came anywhere close to finishing, but Shamil Gaziev went, I don't like getting hit in the face, and I'm really tired, and have been since before the end of round one. We were talking about this on the Boycast. I put up a clip of it on Twitter, but in this guy's last fight, where he was just the hammer against Buday the nail, he gassed in 90 seconds. He throws his right hand fast in the first 90 seconds, and then he's like, he's still there. This isn't great. And he's pitching these slow-ass right hands. There was some dude trying to tell me, well, no, pro fighters, they throw at different speeds. I'd never heard of that before. No, everything this guy threw was at 40% after the first minute and a half of the fight. He just has no gas tank. He's absolutely terrible. At least Rozenstruik waits and conserves his energy and can at least go the 5 rounds. We don't want to see him go the 5 rounds, but he can. Shamil Gaziev came out for the second round wheezing. He was doing that thing like when Chris Chan used to sigh, looked like he wanted to die. Fair play to him, he's tough because he walked through a lot of big shots from a big man. But I don't understand being a professional fighter and not being able to have the first round go at not even a fast pace. It was fairly pedestrian pace and it was going largely his way, and he gassed out doing that. Where if you come down to bantamweight, guys will take 2.5 rounds of having a terrible fight and having a terrible time and getting beaten up, and they'll still be in shape to pull it back in the 3rd round. Deeply unserious fighter, deeply unserious division. Let's talk about the rest of this deeply unserious UFC Apex card then. Prelims had some good moments, actually. Yeah, up until Anders versus Pickett, which I decided to skip because I know both those fighters. Apparently I didn't miss out. They were all right. I think, if you examine them too closely, they start to fall apart because Ludovic Klein knocked out AJ Cunningham, and, Ludovic Klein, long-time established UFC fighter, back to 2020, was supposed to be fighting Joel Alvarez. That's a good fight. Alvarez had visa issues, so AJ Cunningham steps in. AJ Cunningham is just some guy, so he just knocked out a late replacement. Christian Leroy Duncan looked great, but that was mainly because Claudio Ribeiro is absolutely frozen. He looked sketchy against Kopylov. After the Kopylov fight, he looks just terrified to do anything. Zahabi versus Basharat was actually really good. I did say on the Boycast, if you like 15 minutes of MMA done well, that'll be your fight. And it turned into exactly that. And then Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sopai it was okay. Amazing knockout, obviously. That's what everyone will remember from that. But the fight was pretty ho-hum. But yeah, sorry, let's break down some of the details of this. Let's start with the first fight of the night. Loic Radzhabov versus Abdul Karim Alsaadi. Alsaadi had a great fight on the Contender Series against George Hardwick, who was the Cage Warriors lightweight champion. Very good fighter. Cracking body shots. Really great little stabbing left to the body. He keeps his elbow almost on his body and he punches it straight into the solar plexus and folds people in half with it. And everyone was very excited, including me, for that Contender Series fight and then his subsequent UFC debut. Hardwick lost the fight because Alsaadi was really surprisingly good. It was one of those ones where you weren't like, oh, fraud checked. You were like, oh, who's this Alsaadi guy? He's good. This was his first fight in the UFC after that. Loic Radzhabov has had some gassing issues in the past. He's a 2-fight veteran in the UFC. Missed weight against Rebecki in his last one, got knocked out in the second round. That fight was insane to look at because Rebecki looks like a light heavyweight and this dude looks gigantic too. But bigger than ever. Like, if you noticed that, I mean, I said it when we had Hermansson versus Pfeiffer, but USADA was dropped at the start of the year, and boy, are people looking better already. Radzhabov, absolutely massive. He had those Gleison Tibau pop-in cannonball delts. Gleison Tibau popped for drugs in the UFC, left the UFC, and then the main thing that happened to him was that he got giant delts and stopped a load of takedowns with them. It's the secret to takedown defense, by the way. Lateral raises, as evidenced by Khabib being absolutely ineffectual against Gleison Tibau. And I believe that Islam Makhachev had to bitch out and knock him out instead. Absolute pussy, couldn't take him down. We're going to have real Dagestani heads in for this this card, so just to be clear, I'm joking. Anyway, break out the Slacky notebook. What we got? Alsaadi was using footwork really well, just like he did in, or lateral movement really well, just as he did against George Hardwick. I thought Radzhabov was doing a good job of trying to get him along the cage and then herding him into strikes. So he landed a really good left hook along the cage as Selwadi was circling into it. Selwadi did manage to circle back out to the center of the cage a lot, and when he did that, he was doing very well drawing Radzhabov forward with low kicks and stance switches and then retreating in the opposite stance. And he managed to draw him forward onto this ducking overhand a couple of times. The one that Brad Tavares was using over and over again against Dricus du Plessis. Or BJ Penn dropped Diego Sanchez with in the first round of their fight. Second round, Selwadi lands that overhand again and he manages to get Radzhabov down. And Radzhabov did a beautiful single leg get up from half guard. One of the absolute staples of MMA generally, especially if you're out in the open, but even up against the cage. If you have the half guard or if you put yourself in the half guard, you get the underhook on the side where you've got the leg and you get up onto the elbow of your other hand and then you work your way up to your feet. And it's the same as attacking a single leg from there. You come up on the single and you normally threaten them enough, they have to jump to their feet and try and fight off the single, and then you come up into a clinch or you break free. There were a couple of really good, just like basic single leg get-ups on this card. But it was something that Randy Couture worked out back in the day, and it was so effective for him that I believe he even did it against Brock Lesnar, who obviously outweighed him by like 60, 70 pounds. The shame about this one was that Radzhabov was slowing down and Alsaadi was coming on stronger in the third round. And Alsaadi throws I think it was a low kick, and he's stepping back, and Radzhabov throws a left hand to try and counter him on the low kick, and then lunges through and shifts into a right hand and knocks him down. Just got caught coming out of the kick, which is always the danger, especially when you use kicks in that way, like the Volkanovski way, where you use the kicks to draw the guy in, and you're trying to get to your counter off one leg, which is quite tricky. You've got to be really quick, and obviously as the fight goes on, that slows down. What else was good? Ludovic Klein versus AJ Cunningham. This was at lightweight. Someone put up a great clip of basically all of Ludovic Klein's finishes before he got into the UFC, because I only remembered him really from Nate the Train beating him up, overwhelming him. That was the one. I think that was the one where he got the anaconda choke. Nate the Train just put the pace on him with feints and attempts at takedowns and legit attempts at takedowns and level changes that he then came up striking. It was a very good performance by Nate the Train. But yeah, Klein looked really just on another level to this guy here. I hate to say there's levels to this, but there are levels to this. Southpaw Klein looking for the high kick right off the bat. Throws the high kick, and we talk about this all the time. If you throw a kick at someone, they'll often kick back. But if you throw a high kick at someone, they're definitely kicking back, just because of how people's brains work. And Klein throws that high kick, almost catches him. AJ Cunningham immediately throws a high kick back and gets bundled over onto his back. Most of this fight was Ludovic Klein teeing off, doing great work, going to the body and the head. One thing that did keep happening, though, was that Ludovic Klein, even in the course of just wailing on a heavy bag, basically. Actually, no, that's harsh on AJ Cunningham because he was fighting back, whereas there is someone on this card who did fight like a heavy bag, and that's Claudio Ribeiro. But Ludovic Klein would be opening up with his hands, and then on the open side, he'd get caught The open side is your rear hand side, as we're always talking about, because guys don't get down behind their shoulder on their rear hand side. There isn't that little shrug and you've blocked the punch. So, or you can just hide behind your shoulder. But so what happens is Ludovic Klein would throw 3 or 4 punches, and then as his left hand was coming back, he'd get caught over the top with the right hand. Cunningham was sort of covering up and just throwing back blind, but he was still catching Ludovic Klein quite a lot. I think a large part of that was that Ludovic Klein wasn't really moving his head. Sometimes it was because he was overextending it, or not overextending it. He was extending the combination too far, where he could have benefited from throwing a couple of punches or a kick and a couple of punches and then grabbing the clinch, kneeing, pushing away, keeping the guy off balance so that he can't throw back. You either want to be moving so that you're not there as a target for very long, or you want to be moving the other guy around so that he can't throw comfortably. But the combo to finish this was amazing. It was like a couple of body shots, high kick, couple more body shots, front kick to the body. Cunningham just went down like his soul left him through his arse. And Ludovic Klein did he get a bonus? I hope he got a bonus. He at least gets the knockout and the win. Christian Leroy Duncan versus Claudio Ribeiro. I mean, this was great from Christian Leroy Duncan, who I've been waiting to sort of turn up. There was some lovely stuff in here, beautiful lead leg switch kicking and lovely switch kicking in the way that not actually switching your feet altogether, but bringing your left foot back slightly behind your right and then throwing it with it from there. So you square your hips and then you throw it back. Some lovely stuff with that. He did body kick. He did a kick on the arm. He did a front kick off that too. He did a beautiful jab with a cross step, which is something you don't see a lot. But this is such an old technique that Robert Fitzsimmons, who was the 3rd heavyweight champion of the world, first was John L. Sullivan. He was beaten by gentleman Jim Corbett. And then Rob Fitzsimmons came up from, I believe, middleweight and then light heavyweight to fight Corbett, and he beat him. One of Fitzsimmons' favourite blows before it was illegal was the pivot blow, which is what we call the spinning back fist. So there's a book by Robert Fitzsimmons that came out in like the early 1900s where he shows jabbing and stepping his left foot across himself and then spinning into the back fist blow. And that's what Christian Leroy Duncan did with a back elbow here. Because Claudio Ribeiro was just sort of covering up, Christian Leroy Duncan read that and he said, okay, folding elbow time. Great example of this is Vicente Luque versus Brian Barberena. One of them is just covering up. Can't remember. I think it's Barberena's just covering up, and Vicente Luque goes, okay, right, hands on. When you put your hands on the guy's guard as he's covering up, you can pin his hands in place to his head. In MMA, you've got fingers free. So if you're someone like Alistair Overeem, watch him against Brock Lesnar. He's literally holding Brock Lesnar's wrists like he's Jimmy Stewart shaking his wife in a 1940s movie. And that's one of the things I love about 4-ounce Muay Thai is that you get watching the Thais who are good at hand fighting with the ability to grab wrists is really interesting. But yes, if you go hands on, even if you don't have a grip on their wrist, you can go hands on, and then you can push their hands into their head if they've got a very high guard and they're covering up, and then you fold over the elbow into the pocket behind their wrist. My notes then say Claudio Ribeiro is just a heavy bag in this one. He did try and run Christian Leroy Duncan down, but he was really inaccurate with what he was throwing. He was just winging wide shots. It's like if you want to press the guy to the fence, jab, or pick up the lead leg as if you're going to teep and then jab, or there's a load of things you can do. Jab, right, straight jab, not just winging blows. Round 2, Christian Leroy Duncan. Well, Claudio Ribeiro, I think, looked for the takedown first. Christian Leroy Duncan turned him around, took him down, easily mounted him, and pounded him out with elbows. Claudio Ribeiro has definitely, if he had the juice at one point, he's lost it. But a great performance for Christian Leroy Duncan to make everyone forget about the fairly tedious one he had against Armen Petrosian. Oh, and he's knocked out the terrible Denis Tilulin since then. Ayman Zahabi versus Javid Basharat. If you like techers, this is your fight. I really enjoyed this. Zahabi sort of fell in love with his power because he happened to stumble upon a couple of stoppages lately. Now, he beat Arishi Leng, who's a proper hard bastard, so that was quite impressive, by knockout, and Draco Rodriguez by knockout too a couple of years ago. But yeah, a couple of knockouts in his last 3. Seemed to be a bit in love with his power early on because Basharat would feint at him or throw a long kick at him, and Ayman Zahabi would do that thing. It's kind of like Brandon Moreno the other week. He'd throw the punches and lean forward to try and reach with the punches rather than staying on top of his feet, which makes you feel like you're throwing less hard. Well, probably because you might be. But yeah, Zahabi was throwing his punches well out ahead of himself and then falling in behind them. and that let Basharat look very good in the early going of this fight. Basharat was doing some fun stuff with his right uppercut as a lead, which is, you can get into trouble, but there are ways to... It's kind of like if you know what to expect coming back, you can use it to sort of trigger some sequences. So if you throw the right uppercut, you are in danger of the left hook as a counter because your right hand is leaving your right side for so long, and you're naked on that side. You don't really... It's hard to get down behind your shoulder. You have no guard because your right hand's away. So there's been some amazing knockouts where guys have loaded up a big right uppercut and got hit with left hooks. Famously, Tommy Morrison knocked out, it might have been Razor Ruddock. But when you throw the right uppercut, throwing uppercuts sort of takes the opponent out of throwing their own uppercuts. It's very rare to throw an uppercut and the opponent immediately throws an uppercut through the gap that your uppercuts just come through. So that's quite unusual. And also guys don't tend to throw knees if they've just been stood up by the uppercut. So you've sort of cleared a gap for yourself with your uppercut to weave or to bob down the center. Typically guys will throw back around and often they'll look for the left hook. But in that way you can use the right uppercut and then weave immediately in and to your right. And that puts you in a good position to start punching. It gives you a slightly dominant angle, especially if they swing. If you throw the right uppercut and then you just weave into position that they don't throw anything, you've got a slight angle and they're covered up, but you don't gain an awful lot. But if you throw the right uppercut and you weave and they throw the left hook, as happened here with Zahabi a couple of times, you end up on their side and they've just missed, and they're often off balance because they've thrown hard, and you can take advantage of that. So in the first round, Basharat throws his right uppercut, immediately weaves, and Zahabi's thrown the left hook already. Like we're talking about things that just happen. Like if I throw the right uppercut, the left hook either happens or it doesn't. I weave and it doesn't matter if the left hook comes or not. I'm going to where I'm going and I'm going to throw punches from there. But the left hook did happen to be coming back in this instance. Basharat immediately put his left hand on Zahabi and shoved him into the cage and then threw a left kick to the body, which I loved. I thought that was a really nice little combination. He used that right uppercut as a lead and then weaved a couple more times in the fight, but didn't really land anything interesting off it. But it was an interesting look. Something that Willie Pep used to do a lot. He'd be circling the ring, masterful outfighter. Someone would start to close in on him. He'd throw a big right uppercut, like he'd wind it up. They'd stand up, he'd duck in and out to his right and glide off around the ring again. There was a nice Stephen Thompson-style D-side in this fight. The D-side is the defensive sidekick. So a sidekick, typically, if you want to throw a sidekick with power, think of someone like AJ McKee, who loves to open every fight with a sidekick. Step up with your back leg, normally pointing behind you, the toes that is, and then you slam in the sidekick with that little step up. Or think of Bruce Lee doing it on the heavy bag or someone with a kick shield. Big old leaping spring into the sidekick. A D-side is one that comes straight out of your stance. So you normally need to be standing sort of side on first. Now, you can do that like Stephen Thompson by standing sideways in that little horse stance and lean back onto your back, lean back onto your rear leg and throw the kick that way. Or you can do it as a secondary motion following a missed kick. So you're not going to be in a side-on stance normally if you're in a sport where people can kick the legs. But when you miss a kick, you will end up side-on, and then as they come in on you, you pick up the leg that you've just thrown and you side kick them in the body. And sometimes you bundle them over, as in this case. He threw a flying knee, got out of position, Ayman Zahabi ran in on him, and he just tapped him in the solar plexus with the side kick, and Zahabi fell over. But famously, Stephen Thompson did it a couple of times to Jorge Masvidal, whose balance is pretty good normally. Like he stays on top of his feet. He used to have pretty good footwork, and he got thrown completely out of position because every time he saw Stephen Thompson's back being turned, he'd go, "Oh, I've got him now," and then he'd run in and just run onto the side kick. But interestingly, towards the end of the round, Zahabi started to find the low kick as a counter to Basharat's jab. So Basharat would step in and Zahabi would time the low kick, and that is the big weapon to take away jabbing in MMA. And for the last part of that first round, Basharat goes southpaw. So the second round opens up and Zahabi starts to crowd him more effectively, get off more combinations. Basharat's still looking good, but then towards the end of the second round, he's taking really bad shots at takedowns, and he did about 2 or 3 and got really tired quite quickly. Third round, Basharat herds him along the fence, and as he's going along the fence, Zahabi moves in one direction, which is to his right, which is Basharat's left. Basharat tries to time the back kick and almost gets him, but he just misses slightly off the side. But that's the importance of changing direction along the fence. We'll get into that more later with someone else. Basharat also herded him into a nice right hand when he tried to circle back the other way. But interestingly, after Basharat doing most of the kicking and kneeing in this fight, Zahabi starts to land with low kicks and then a really nice switch kick to the body he timed as Basharat was stepping in. Yeah, this was an interesting one because it went down, 2-1. Zahabi won. I feel like you could have given it to Basharat because I think he did more in terms of like volume of stuff. I think that Zahabi had a couple of the bigger connections. Not going to be annoyed either way because I thought it was a really good fight and they both gave a good account of themselves. A lot of people were very upset with Basharat's gas tank. He did sort of tire himself out in the second round when he shot for those takedowns. And a lot of people were saying that Basharat has no power in his hands, which, yeah, fair accusation because he was not really hurting Zahabi. But there were a couple of those right uppercuts jacked Zahabi's head back, which was nice. But yeah, Zahabi really impressed me because I think like a lot of people, I was a bit deflated after he came into the UFC with some hype and he got back elbowed by Ricardo Ramos right away and then lost his next fight. But he seems to be putting together a pretty good run. Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sopai was, you don't need to talk an awful lot about this one, I don't think. The main interesting thing was the knockout. Jesus Christ. Sopai got the back in the second round, and we're going to talk about this with Umar and Nurmagomedov, but he got the back, and he had the back, and he was dominating until he fell off the back. And then once you're off the back, you're on the bottom. And then he got beat up for the entirety of the second round when he fell onto the bottom. Went back to his corner looking in terrible shape. A lot of discussion about like who should be throwing in towels after this fight. But he goes back out, and in the third round, he sort of like stands there and gets beaten up a bit, or quite a lot actually. And in the dying seconds of that round, he gets low kicked and left hooked. He's off balance and he sort of stumbles over to the cage, but in like a tired way, not in a out on his feet way. But he's just sort of like wandering, and obviously he's tired and his hands aren't up and he's in no position to like jump out of the way when Oliveira runs up and knees him in the chin. And the placement was perfect. It was knee across the jawline, completely undefended. Sopai fell on his face. It was a really bad looking knockout. Do feel for him. I thought Oliveira did a good job. One of the interesting things that came up in this fight from a Tekka's perspective, if you don't just, we'll all remember it for the flying knee and not a lot else probably, but Tekka's wise, Oliveira threw a wheel kick in the first round. In fact, he was trying to time Sopai's circling. So anytime you want to, the best time to throw any kind of spinning technique, aside from when you step across yourself, like I said earlier, the best time is when you can get a guy circling into it. And the best time for that, of course, is to put them against the cage or the ropes, because they have to circle one way or the other. So you've got a 50-50 chance of them circling right into it, even if you closed your eyes. And most of the time, people circle them, they go one way a bit, and then they go back the other way. So you can normally see them. Getting off the fence is about being able to change direction pretty convincingly, like juking in American football or regular football or any sport that involves juking. But yeah, he totally misread Sopai and threw up a wheel kick when Sopai wasn't going in that direction. And Sopai just ducked under it, got the leg and bundled him over. But then from the bottom, Oliveira was in half guard and he did exactly what we've been talking about as quite an important technique recently in MMA and not in submission grappling. It's throwing up the reap from in half guard. So going for a heel hook in the way that Alejandro Pantoja does anytime he's on the bottom, and Overeem did it 4 times or 3 times against Curtis Blades. If you need to see what I mean, go watch that fight. But attacking the leg from half guard like that is a mess because your other leg's hanging out, so you're in danger of getting leg locked yourself. But in MMA, the concern is rarely being leg locked. The concern is getting pounded with punches from the top. So you throw this mutual ashi, as they call it, because both of your legs, your legs and your opponent's legs are in danger, as opposed to normally when you're trying to get both your legs inside and keep your legs safe while you attack his. So you get this mutual ashi, which is completely out of fashion in no-gi grappling because you're putting yourself in danger. But in MMA, you can throw it up easily from the half guard. You can direct their knee across your body so that they're turned away and can't really punch you very effectively. And it's very unusual that they'd like attack a toe hold or something like that. They're going to be thinking about punching you and defending their leg. So Oliveira used that beautifully to get up here. Matt Schnell versus Steve Urquig, or Ursig. Steve Ursig was great. Yeah, Matt Schnell came out and he took the center of the cage and then he tried to get Ursig back to the fence and he double jabbed. And every time you tune into this podcast, I will tell you to double jab. I'll be like, people need to be double jabbing, double jab this, double jab that. It's the answer to moving people around the cage. It's the answer to dealing with competent counter strikers. It's the answer to making stuff happen without opening yourself up too much. But you can't just turn your brain off. The reason that the double jab is valuable, I've just said there's 1,000 reasons it's valuable. One of the main reasons that it's valuable is that you can make stuff happen. You can move the guy around without opening up too much. You are still opening up. So you need to have your head on a swivel because you might need to get down behind your shoulder. You might need to duck. You might need to slip off to your left. You still need to be ready to defend and move your head and parry and block and deal with strikes or takedown attempts. And Schnell just sort of goes forward behind the double jab and immediately eats a counter to the face. Urzig's left hook was landing from really early on. And his right hand, actually. He basically couldn't miss. Schnell, I watched him beat Sumaderji, who is a big banger, and he was giving him hell on the feet in that fight. But he seems to have like the hand speed of a man 20, 30 pounds heavier, really struggling to get to the mark faster than Ursic. And then Ursic was also doing he threw the jab a couple of times and Schnell was reaching right out to parry it. So he showed a shoulder fake and threw the left hook around the side and then immediately threw the right hand after he'd hit him. It was really lovely. Schnell was already covered in blood, comes out for the second round. Ursic throws a right straight to the body and left hook, knocks him out. Brutal. And Toyoni was reffing this one. I mean, he was reffing the Alsaadi fight and he took forever stopping it. But Toyoni, we have a thing called Chris Toyoni moments, or rather a thread on my Twitter called Chris Toyoni moments, which is just Chris Toyoni like tripping over the fighters. He's the only ref who routinely stands where the fighters are going to go. But he has a lot of funny moments. But one of his funniest moments ever happened after this fight. They caught him on camera talking to Schnell and his cornerman and going, "Oh yeah, the knockout was bad, but your head bouncing off the mat was way worse. Wait till you go home and see it. You've definitely got brain damage." I've never seen anything like it. It was so funny. Chris Toyoni, the kind of guy to come over for your Christmas party and then tell everyone what a massive dump he did in your toilet, and he's astonished it flushed. Umar Nurmagomedov, Umi Nurms versus Bezkat Alakazam, Al-Makam. Yeah, we talked about this on the Boycast, and I put a bit of the Umar talk out on the preview on the YouTube. We had a good chat about how Umar isn't the most ducked person alive. He's pulled out of many of the important fights in his career. And, he after this fight was like, "I have pulled out for legitimate reasons," and listed the reasons. It's like, yes, everyone pulls out for legitimate reasons. And people also fight with those awful things going on. It's good that he's in a position to be financially comfortable not pulling out those fights. But how often do you hear that someone's fighting and they're like, "Oh, it's a really important fight for me because my dad died this week," or whatever. But yeah, there have always been people willing to fight him. The craziest thing is that after this fight, people are talking like Corey Sandhagen ducked him. It's like, what the fuck? Al-Makam was an unknown, and he was, I think he had like a 17-1 record or something like that. Oh no, sorry, 16-1. But his record was mixed because he also competed in like a regional sport that is basically MMA. So my boy Jay Petrie at Sherdog, he put up a really interesting Twitter thread just sort of compiling what they could find of Al-Makam. And yeah, he looked decent. In this one, I would say, certainly in this one, his striking looked very one note. Umar stepped in with a raised knee as like a fake. He couldn't decide what he was doing. It looked like he got a bit caught up and got clipped by a big overhand over the back of the head and got dropped. And everyone went, "Oh, that's interesting. That's why late replacements and unknowns are dangerous in MMA." But then that's basically all Al-Makam had on the feet. Every time, I mean, Umar's boxing is not great, and his team admit that, but every time he pumped the jab from quite a way out, Al-Makam would throw an overhand back in such a committed way that Umar would easily drop on his hips to get the takedown. Every time. It's like, if you replaced that goofy big overhand with a goofy big uppercut off the same hand, you'd actually be in a better position. Like you'd actually have a decent chance of hitting him in the chest or whatever when he drops on your leg, and then having an underhook and trying to be able to dig him up and winding him a bit too, or maybe you catch his head if you're lucky. But no, he was going for big overhands against a guy who wants to drop on his hips all the time, and that's just very silly behaviour. I'm not saying uppercuts magically, I'm not one of those traditional martial arts guys who goes, "Well, if someone tried to take me down, I'd just hit him with an uppercut or a knee and they'd be unconscious instantly." No, I'm just saying like it puts you in a better position to stop the shot. If you throw an uppercut, you hit him in the chest or whatever, which will wind you and take its toll over time, and then you can dig an underhook and start sprawling back. Uppercuts to the chest are one I'm very big on, as in when they're level changing. But as soon as Umar's dropped, he grabs onto the single leg, gets his hand locked under the buttock, and there was a really good video came out last week by Earn Your Gold Medal, which is a great wrestling channel. I'm not sure what the dude's name is, but he's a wrestling coach and he studies like trends of current wrestlers, which is, I mean, that's got to be really fast moving because they do like 4 years through school and college, and then you're gone. You're off like selling milk futures or whatever it is all these guys in Ohio do. But yeah, he tends to put out things in little drips and drabs. So I think he does them after big tournaments. But he'll put out like 5 videos in a week and then he won't do anything for a couple of months. But he put out one called, real clickbaity title, Best Wrestler Ever at Finishing Extended Shots. It's about a lad called Woodley. And he does a great cutback, which is one of Ben Askren's favourite moves from back in the day. But you get the single and they sprawl on you hard. And you keep your hands locked right under their buttocks so that they can go as far as they possibly can before your hands break apart. And you get your head out to the side, you start building up, and you get your head on the opposite side of their body to the leg that you've got caught. And they're really sprawled out, so you can start using your head to turn them over like a double leg, but with just the single leg caught. So it's called a cutback. Go look it up on YouTube if you want to know what it is, or go watch that video by Earn Your Gold Medal. But it was one of Khabib's favourite moves before he started competing in the cage, because, I mean, obviously we all remember him for his grinding cage work and just taking people down over and over again and recycling those positions. But he competed in a ring for a long time, and he used to get the single leg and hit the cutback to put people down. Sonny Brown has a good video of that. But it's a really good move for MMA because guys, particularly in MMA where guys learn wrestling in a context where they won't be like scrambling and stuff, they'll be just, I want to punch and I want to defend takedowns. So it's like the first thing you learn is sprawl and sprawl hard. And if you sprawl really hard and the guy keeps his hands locked and gets his head out to the side, he's got a great chance of just pancaking you over with the cutback. So he hits this cutback and he turns Almakhan over, and he lands in basically an over-under guard pass position past his guard, and he puts himself back in half guard, as we're always talking about, to get himself comfortable before he passes again. One of my criticisms of Umar particularly, and everyone from that camp who isn't Khabib, is like, why aren't you hitting enough from the top? And he actually did a good job here. He went to sort of a modified scarf hold and started dropping elbows. And then you saw what makes Umar and different to everyone else from that camp. When Almakhan turned his back, Umar jumps on people's backs. And we talked about this extensively in the preview on the Boycast. This has cost him against like Morozov and people, and it's not necessarily the best tactical move. If you watch all of those guys from that camp, the Dagestanis and all the guys from AKA, they prioritize when the opponent turtles, they get behind them, yes, but then they control wrists, they keep the guy down, they keep punching him, and every time he tries to get up, they put him down again. They like the turtle, they don't like getting on the back from the turtle. Until later in the fight, like Khabib versus Conor, Khabib versus Dustin. In the 4th round, he goes, okay, I'm getting on your back now, and he pulls them back over their heels and jumps on their back. Or Islam versus Thiago Moises. He's behind him for like 4 rounds, kneeing his legs, throwing him down, punching him again. And then in the 4th or 5th round, he goes, I'm getting on your back now. For them, the back is like a finishing position, not a jump on it position. Because as you saw with Bernardo Sopai earlier, if you fall off the back, you're in trouble. If you stay on the back and they turn so that they're looking up at the ring lights and you're underneath them but on their back, you can't hurt them. You can't hit them. And that's what happened to Umar for most of this first round. Now, there is the qualifier here that he was dinged by a big punch, so he might have just been holding on and going like, yeah, fine, I'll stay on his back. I'm not going to choke him, probably. I'm not going to be able to strike him, probably, but I'll recover, and then 2nd round, 3rd round, I'll go after it. But he has done this before against Sergei Morozov. He took the back early, fell off, took the back early again, fell off, and he had a lot of trouble that way. But he's made the rear naked choke like his thing. He's big on taking the back and finishing. But yes, Almakhan gets back on top by turning into him when he's on his back. The rest of the fight is like those jabs to level changes, and Almakhan just keeps throwing back with the overhand and like giving the most obvious shot in the world. You got some nice crackdowns and things. Lots of singles with the head on the outside. Father's plan. Go watch the seminars with Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. He's very big on shooting with your head outside on the single leg to keep you away from the knee and to keep you away from the uppercut. There was a beautiful cartwheel across the body. He got past the guard on one side and then put his head on the floor and cartwheeled to the side where Almakhan's back was exposed. There was a great Instagram series of clips of Kit Dale doing that in some Australian Open. He was really into just passing the guard, like 90% passing the guard one way, and then putting his head on the floor and cartwheeling over to the other side because they would turn their back off the floor and expose it to try and turn into him. So you just hop across their body. But I will say Almakhan, not necessarily the most technical ground fighter, but he did pick his spots in this one. There were a lot of opportunities where there were a lot of times where he seized his opportunity and powered up and got to a better position. So he hits a great bridge, times it as Umar's passing his guard and gets back up to the feet. He got mounted twice and was able to hit a sit-up escape the first time and bridge and roll the second time. Or bridge and roll to the point that he then recovered half guard. But yeah, I was really impressed. Umar's guard passing looked great. Umar's takedowns looked great. Almakhan's wrestling didn't look great. Almakhan's striking didn't look great. But Almakhan's survivals and escapes looked pretty solid. In the third round, you got a little bit of what I really liked to see from Umar. We talked about this on the preview, but he does a great job of taking people's back along the fence and they'll get up on one hand and he'll keep their weight on that hand. So they don't want to go down and be flat along the fence. They want to keep up on the hand and keep building up. They think they're doing something good. But because that hand's on the floor, that hand can't hand fight. So that's the side that he punches the hand through for the choke. He's basically working two hands against one on the hand that they don't have on the mat. So in jiu-jitsu, you get the back, you use, or rather the modern meta is to use one of your legs to trap one of their arms so that you've got two hands free to choke and they've got one hand free to defend you. Umar makes that happen by getting on your back while you've got one hand on the mat, holding you up. And then the whole time that hand is holding your weight, you're not fighting his hands with it. So that's when he catches a lot of his chokes. But Almakhan did the smart thing, which is also the dumb thing, because it's putting yourself in a very bad position to avoid getting choked. So he flopped back to the floor. He just went, okay, you're mounting me. Which, respect to him, it worked. But yes, what I really liked was they were in half guard in the middle of the cage. Almakhan started shrimping back to try and make space and or to get to the fence and start standing up. Umar followed him and then ran around his top leg and got into a leg drag position, and that started the back take that he loves to do along the fence. So that was really cool. Go watch him run around that leg in the third round. You don't see an awful lot of guys doing that. And finally, Muhammad Mokaev versus Alex Perez. This was supposed to be a gimme because Alex Perez is at the point in his career where he's basically flyweight Tony Ferguson. Hasn't lost as many fights, but his body is falling apart. The thing about Tony Ferguson is that he doesn't pull out of fights even when his body's falling apart. I read an interesting take on Mokaev on Twitter. Scrunko said, the only reason people think he is a future champ is because of the O and the chin strap beard. If he was 11-1 Clint Johnson, nobody would be giving him a second glance. There is a weird community sort of praising this dude as the next champion. And he has struggled with a lot of the people he's fought, getting himself put in submissions and busting his leg open, being unable to do basically anything to Charles Johnson on the ground, going life and death with Malcolm Gordon, who is not very good. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt here because I thought Alex Perez looked better than I expected him to. His striking was arse. He struck exactly like a guy whose big win was a calf-kicking TKO over Gaziev Formiga when he just discovered the calf kick and Gaziev Formiga didn't know what it was. So Alex Perez is out here in a very short stance, throwing calf kicks and missing wildly. But where Perez did look good was when Mokaev tried to take him down. As the first round progressed, he was stuffing shots out in the open, and then when they got to the fence, he was doing great work there. He was he was stopping the arms from getting locked together. He was threatening the ninja choke every time that Mokaev drove in behind his head. And by the end of the fight, Muhammad Mokaev is shooting takedowns and then kneeling down into a front headlock and trying to work from there. And to be fair to him, he did hit a beautiful peek out at one point with his back to the fence. He turned it all around, and that was gorgeous. But a lot of them, he was just shooting and then sitting down so that he didn't get kneed in the head. The thing that didn't win Aljo any fans, so I don't know if it's going to win Mokaev any fans. But yes, man looked a bit lost by the end of the third round. But credit where it's due, I thought his striking looked better than it has possibly ever. Muhammad Mokaev typically strikes like he's promised his striking coach he's going to try something and then gets it out of the way and goes, oh, thank God, I can cling to the guy again. If you watch his fight with Charles Johnson, he comes out and hits him with two great punches right off the bat and then is terrified to strike again, even from top position for the rest of the fight. The whole fight is just him locking his hands and trying to keep hold. But here he had some lovely variety. There was a great one in the first or second round where they hit the clinch and Perez starts pushing him back, and he hits him with a knee that folds Perez in half, and he turns Perez onto the fence. And I don't think people noticed how hurt Perez was by that knee. Some of the knees in this fight from Mokaev were really good. There was a really cool takedown off the fence in the first round, which came off a fit-in, which is when you're in an over-under clinch, you put your overhand down inside their thigh and you push it into the fence, or you cup the inside of their thigh. And Mokaev stepped around him and hit what, I've seen it called a scissor trip back in old wrestling books. Something the Iranians do a lot. If you go watch any study on the Iranian underhook on YouTube, they'll throw a guy by with the underhook and then they'll scoop grip behind the far leg and step around the near leg, and that creates a trip. But then he gets top position and he's in side control, and he turns his hips to face towards Perez's legs like he's going to mount him. And Perez grabs a crotch lock over the top leg. So he wraps his hand around the top leg and locks his hands in Mokaev's crotch. And Mokaev can't really do anything. So as Mokaev makes a big movement to try and free his hips, Perez is able to scramble up. It's very cool. Like that a lot. But yeah, that squatting in the front headlock was very weird. Not least because, yeah, he hit a really nice peek out from it. I think Josie Aldo on Twitter put up a great clip of this and showed some other stuff of guys wall wrestling and hitting it. And the great thing about the peek out and the duck under is that you're sending the opponent behind you as you duck under them. And if they're going straight into the fence, they don't have room to turn around and face you. But the way that he was sitting in the front headlock was very strange, because typically when you're in a front headlock, when someone's front headlocking you, you take the same side of the body that they've got the arm around the neck and you hold their elbow. You post up on the other hand, and the side that they're holding the neck is the one that you post your leg up on, and you start trying to run up to your feet, or you start trying to sucker drag, or you start trying to elbow pass, cross knee tap, dumps. There's loads of things from there that you can try that are not necessarily high percentage, but they create scrambles. But Mokaev was in the front headlock, and instead of bringing the leg up on the same side that he was controlling the arm, he was bringing the leg up on the other side, which can mean that the guy can cradle you. So if you watch the very first time he does this in round 2, he's sat there he's squatted down with one knee up, basically, and Perez could have just grabbed the cradle if he wanted to. Now, the cradle is a limited sort of position because you can't really do anything if your hands are locked, and you can't knee the guy in the head. If you could knee the guy in the head, the cradle is the best position in all combat sports, basically. But you can still use it to turn the guy to his back. You can still, the Danaher boys use it or the Danaher boys like to show leg entries from it, though I've never seen them hit one. Though Palhares hit some leg entries from the Turtle in his ADCC run. But yeah, it was just a very weird way for him to hold himself in the front headlock defensively. And I don't know if it opened up more the duck unders or not. So yeah, real inside baseball shit there, but something to look at. They're talking about Mokaev versus Pantoja, and I think that's an interesting one because Pantoja, obviously, brilliant on the ground, decent takedown defense. If you saw him against Askar Askarov, he lost the decision, but he really was working his arse off to defend takedowns in that fight. And he's just so scrambly too. Askarov, in the Askarov fight, he leaps off the fence and rolls underneath Askarov into a crab ride. He's very, very dangerous as a back taker, especially. And the other thing is that, we talked about this with Umar, he doesn't just take backs and fall off. He's coming up on leg drags, he's keeping top position. He doesn't make many mistakes and fall off people. Which, when you consider Mokaev's history of doing really well, but then falling into an armbar with his arm fully extended, or letting the guy get on top of him out of nowhere. That fight looks less promising. Obviously, a lot better on the feet from what we've seen than... I say better, just game. He's very game on the feet. Mokaev fights like he knows he doesn't have to strike. Pantoja fights like he would rather not strike, but that's what's going to get attention. It really is, Dana White privilege, but Mokaev has had the hype train behind him since day one, whereas Pantoja was like, please give me a title shot, I've been winning forever. But you just keep doing Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno. No reason Mokaev couldn't lay all over him for 5 rounds. I just think he's got a hard ask if he can't. He's not an early finisher most of the time, and it's a hard ask to try and control a guy like Pantoja for 5 rounds. And he slowed down so much in that 3rd round that you're like, well, don't want to be doing 5 rounds. But then Pantoja gassed pretty hard in the 4th of his fight with Royval and then poured it on in the 5th. Anyway, that'll do for today. I'm a little bit fatigued from just the moronic takes on Tyson Pedro. Fight I don't need to cover, but Tyson Pedro said he's broke, which is really sad because he had 11 fights with the UFC. Yes, he had a 3-year layoff because of injuries, but he's had 11 fights in the UFC, which is like double what, well, probably like triple what most people can hope to achieve. And this moronic fan base is like, well, you know, he went 6-5 and 8 of those were bums. It's like, no, he's one of like 20, 22 people on the card. He's a huge part of the product. When they go to Australia and New Zealand, they use him to sell the product. You know, it's just this insane... I think it's because a lot of MMA fans aren't followers of sports and are more followers of like NFTs than Elon Musk. But there is this like bootlicking type of fan who believes that fighters should be kept hungry or some shit. It's like every other sport has benefited, the sport itself, the quality of athletes in it, from paying more. And people seem to think that like, if you pay fighters, they just won't fight. Who do you know anywhere who wouldn't want to make more money than they are now? But then I saw Eddie Alvarez arguing against an increase in marginal tax on earnings over $1 million or whatever it was, would stop people trying to earn more than $1 million. It's like, what? Why would you not want more money? If you're taxed at a higher rate on some of that money, you still want more money. I've never met anyone who's just like, well, I'm not trying then. But yeah, it's really fatiguing watching these people who love this sport, I presume, because they're fucking on Twitter talking about it all the time, being like, yeah, but fuck the people who take part in it. Anyway, next week we got a decent, well, I say decent, it's actually very good. UFC 299, I'm looking down it, it's banger after banger. So I'm super psyched to talk about that. We got a surprisingly good PFL Europe main event between the superstar Cedric Doumbé and Baki, whose full name I'm not going to say because it's incredibly complicated. But yeah, I mean, massive balls on Cedric Doumbé to take that fight against a very, very strong wrestler when his whole thing is being a kickboxer. It's like Alex Pereira hasn't had to fight one wrestler of like the equivalent quality of Baki in his entire career. But that 299 card is banging. Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis, Kevin Holland versus Michael Page, Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddalena, Piotr Jan's back against Song Yadong, Caitlin Chikagian snuck in there, fuck's sake, Gamrot versus Dos Anjos, Pedro Munoz versus Kyler Phillips. Jesus Christ, this card slaps, mate. Anyway, I'll be back to talk about that later in the week. Might drop a Filthy Casuals guide or something in between. I'm your boy Jack Slack. If you want to see all the extra stuff I do for the Patreon boys and listen to the Boycast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, hoping never to see Shamil Gaziev again. Bless.